All right, YouTube, it's time for Occult Video 54 on the topic of karma. Now, first and foremost, I don't believe in karma. I base this on the following observation, which is that all of the belief systems that stress that there's some sort of reward or punishment depending on your actions or thoughts or whatever in life, whether you're talking about an afterlife, reincarnation, or something else, it really doesn't make any difference. All of these systems do the same thing, which is they claim a subjective moral guide. I have a problem with that. I am not going to just take it as granted that any of these individual systems is true. Now, looking at it strictly from the basis of survival and human welfare and happiness and so forth, being at peace, enjoying life. Looking at it that way, you can say certain subjective moral systems are better than others on a pragmatic basis. Certainly a system which rewards constant butchery and human sacrifice and blowing things up and burning people's homes to the ground, that's probably not the society most people want to live in. Most people probably would prefer to avoid such a thing. Now, the moral system itself is just a guide for people. It doesn't mean it necessarily gets taken seriously, and there are always multiple spiritual and religious paths that people follow. In my own spiritual path, I do believe in doing no harm. Like, I don't go out of my way to go outside and kill animals for sport. I don't just, chop trees to the ground for no reason and sit there laughing because I've killed a life form or whatever. It's not because I'm worried about some sort of eternal or temporal punishment for doing so. It's because it's just retarded. It's just not what I'm interested in doing. I have an appreciation for life, both human, animal, and plant life as well. Fungi, mold, it's all life to me. And I see it as important. I don't have a problem with it unless it's attacking me or unless I'm ravenous and I need to eat something. I'm not going to go out of my way to harm any other life form. I think that fits in with the Satanic doctrine. I see the Satanic doctrine ultimately as a philosophy, not as a spiritual system. I see it as superior to all others because essentially if everyone were to adopt it, it would be quite a peaceful world. People would leave one another alone. It would be essentially like a libertarian world. You leave others alone, you certainly can defend yourself if you're not being left alone to your own devices. You don't randomly fuck with animals unless you're being attacked or you're hungry. You certainly don't harm children. You respect the earth and it'll be clean and people essentially do what they wish to do if it's not harming anybody else. And you can debate all day over what the ramifications are as far as industry and things like that go, and that's a healthy conversation that's held within the political arena as well. But it's not that I avoid being a shitfuck because I'm afraid of being punished. I would say this is a common criticism of Christianity. If you have to be told, if you have to be cajoled and threatened into not killing people or raping people or whatever, then you're not necessarily a good person anyway. The only reason that you're avoiding doing evil is because you're afraid of punishment. What does that say about you as a person? I like to believe that any moral system should be largely based on biological reality, as opposed to just being an abstract sort of arcane moral guide made 2,000 years ago when people thought sperm came from the kidneys or whatever. For instance, Islam or Christianity or Judaism. You look at these ancient faiths, and their moral laws, they don't really sync up with the modern age. But here's where they can continue to survive even if they're woefully outdated. They can change over time in accordance with natural selection. Spiritual systems do too, and that's actually the other reason why I don't really take moral systems and their threat of punishment or their promise of reward seriously. Because if you look at the history of any of these groups, even the so-called authentic, like Eastern paths, they change over time. Certainly, especially recently in modernity, even the Eastern paths that were more purist over time, they've changed too. The reason I think that this could be just throwing an idea at the wall. I think the reason why Eastern paths changed less until recently is because the Eastern world until fairly recently wasn't industrialized, wasn't heavily literate, didn't have sort of the academic tradition, and had to westernize before that happened. Whereas you look at Europe and you go back to ancient Greece or Rome, you already have sort of these philosophical schools, the academies and so forth. Even in the Islamic world, they have this advantage over sort of the Eastern mentalities. So you have Hinduism and Buddhism, two very old faiths. They change very little until fairly recently. There's some diaspora. There's some changing around of minutiae as people migrate around and start teaching. You have different philosophical schools and so forth. But as a whole, it's mostly homogenized until fairly recently. But even then, if you look at some, like, take Hinduism, you look at Telugu News, you look at any of the news services out of India, what do you see now? You don't see people practicing an authentic faith. You see people listening to what are essentially televangelists, Hindu style, hawking, fake gold Hanuman statuettes or something like that. And it's rather sad in a way, because there is something to be said for an authentic, many thousands of year old faith that's unadulterated. I think you'd probably have to go to some uncontacted tribe in the Amazon to find a spiritual system that's actually more authentic to its original usage. But the fact that they all have changed over time, the fact that they're all subjective in my mind, means I don't really take them seriously. It's like when a Christian tells me, oh, you'll go to hell if you do this, that, the other thing. You didn't accept Jesus. I don't care, because I don't believe in these things. Or Muslims, when they tell me, you've got to recite the Shahada and start praying. No, I don't, because I don't think that Allah exists. I don't really care even if he would, because I would see such a being as a tyrant anyway. As somebody who's more into the Luciferian sort of liberated ideology, sort of the Romanticist era Satan to me represents something that's good. It doesn't represent something to me that's evil. Even if I'm no longer a Satanist, strictly speaking, and I just sort of appreciate the philosophy, I can certainly appreciate the archetype. So no, I'm not a believer in karma. I can understand why others do, or hell and heaven, or anything like that, the reincarnation process being affected by your actions. I can understand why people believe in such a thing. But oftentimes the moral modes which are used are simply cultural, and they come from a specific era and time. They change over time, which should show you that their message is worth absolutely nothing whatsoever as far as an objective guide to how to live your life. If it's changing constantly, it's like Catholicism. The Pope, a couple hundred years ago, they're like, smash the heathens, everyone should be Catholic. Now you've got the Pope saying Europe needs more Muslims, and we need to respect all faiths, and there can't be any violence, we can't reject anybody, and it's okay, these Protestants, they can go to heaven too, and probably the Jews and all these groups. It's totally different. It's nothing like Catholicism circa, the 1700s or something. It's a complete reversal on most parts of the core message of Catholicism, other than, eat this little wafer and have a sip of wine. Other than that, they get rid of the Latin Mass. It just makes no sense. And so I look at that belief system, I say, because it's ever changing, it's not really authentic. I can applaud it for being more pragmatic, for being able to change, as opposed to, certain groups within Islam, fire and brimstone, sort of like Southern Baptists or Pentecostals or something. I can appreciate that, but at the same time, it is a cheapening of the message. So you have the interplay between faiths and religious bodies that seem outdated, violent, and stupid, and those that seem inauthentic and more concerned with simply continuing to grow because they endorse pragmatism. And so I don't really take either side that seriously, honestly. That's about all. Peace out.